My name is Garrett, and this took place when I was a sophomore in college. When I didn't get a dorm after freshman year, I scrambled for off-campus housing. Long story short, I ended up in a co-op, part of a three-house community that was sort of near campus, but not really. It wasn't ideal, but it was cheap, and I didn't have many options. Plus, I had a bike, so I didn't mind the extra travel time. Most of the residents were young students like me, but there were a few exceptions, a handful of alumni, one or two teaching assistants, and a few older people getting their degrees later in life. The person who immediately stood out was an older woman who lived in one of the other houses. From what I could tell, she was maybe in her late 50s, though she looked older. She had graying hair and walked with a limp like she had a back injury. She was quiet, mostly kept to herself, and always had a blank expression. I assumed she had some connection to the university, maybe faculty or an alumna, but no one explained and I didn't ask. The first time I saw her do something strange was in our common kitchen, which was odd to begin with because the other two houses had their own kitchens. I wasn't sure why she'd be in ours. She wasn't cooking, eating, or talking to anyone, just standing there while the rest of us were chatting, making dinner, and listening to music. She didn't try to join in, she just watched us blankly. I caught her eyes a few times, and part of me felt she was watching me specifically, though I knew that was unlikely. No one acknowledged her, which I thought was weird. Maybe they knew something I didn't. Later that week, I was doing homework in my room when I saw her again. I glanced out my window and there she was staring up at me. As if that wasn't strange enough, she wasn't on the sidewalk but in the middle of the street. It was late, decently cold, and she must have been freezing. I couldn't tell if she was looking into my window or just in the general direction of the house, but it felt like she was staring at me. I don't know why, but I waved, trying to be friendly. The moment I did, I regretted it. She didn't wave back. Instead, she jumped up and down a few times, like she was excited, then ran toward one of the other houses, presumably hers. I felt sick. Not only had I acknowledged her, but I'd confirmed she'd been looking into my room. Even if she hadn't, she now knew which room was mine. That night, I asked a housemate about her. He said she'd always been there and that I should ignore her like everyone else did. I inquired further, but he didn't know anything, just repeating what someone told him when he moved in. It didn't sit right, so I asked around until I got some answers. A senior in her house said she was associated with the university, a little cookie, but had no history of violence or getting physical. I asked why no one found it as strange as I did, and he said they couldn't control who lived there. That was up to the property manager. I wasn't satisfied, but there was nothing I could do, so I tried to block her out of my mind. Then it got worse. One night, I walked out of my room and nearly ran into her. She was in the hallway, standing right in front of my door. I jumped back because she caught me so off guard. It was past midnight on a Tuesday, so the house was mostly dead. She didn't say anything when she saw me, barely reacted, just turned and walked away, as if I were the one intruding. I'm not going into every detail, but there were several more incidents like that, catching her snooping where she had no business or doing something odd. At some point, I lost my room key. All three houses had once been part of the same hotel, so each room had personal locks and keys. It was a co-op, so most people left their doors unlocked, but I couldn't sleep comfortably knowing someone could walk in, so losing my key was a big deal. Everyone had a spare, including me, but I was annoyed because I'd have to make a copy, an extra hassle I couldn't afford. A few nights later, I woke up randomly. I wasn't sure why at first, but then I heard it, a soft bumping from my closet every 20 seconds or so, like something shifting behind the door. I'm not one to scare easily, and I'm definitely not helpless in danger, so I decided to handle it myself. I quietly got out of bed, took a deep breath, and slowly walked to the closet, trying to control my breathing. My heart was racing. In one fluid motion, I ripped the door open and screamed like a crazy person. Just as I expected, she was in there. She had one of my ties wrapped around her neck, her eyes wide open, holding a kitchen knife in her other hand. My scream must have startled her because she lunged at me with the knife outstretched before I could react. I screamed again, this time from pure fear. I wrestled her to the ground and disarmed her easily, given how frail and small she was. That didn't make it less terrifying. She kicked, fought, and bit as I pinned her. Screaming the whole time, I yelled for help, and I heard doors slam as housemates ran down the hall. My friend Lee helped me immobilize her, and we kept her pinned while someone called the police. The rest of the night was a blur. The police arrived quickly and arrested her on the spot. By then, she'd stopped screaming but refused to say anything, which was unsettling. The cops found my room key on her, real big shocker. A few weeks later, we learned who she was. Apparently, she was the property manager's sister, whom he'd let live there under the radar. She had severe mental health issues, and instead of getting her proper care, he'd thrown her into an unoccupied room. I believe the property manager was eventually arrested for negligence and other charges, and rightfully so. I blame him more than her. I feel bad for her, but my pity won't erase the fact that she tried to kill me. I could have lost my life that night. I have no idea why she was so interested in me, but I hope nothing like that ever happens again. I'm graduating soon, and I'll miss college, but I'll never look back without thinking about that night. This isn't really my story, but I watched it unfold, so I'm telling it anyway. I've lived in a modest two-story home with my husband, Benjamin, for the better part of 20 years. All our kids are out living their own lives, and I couldn't be prouder. What I'm about to tell you happened last year. Someone moved into the house across the street, which was nice because I was tired of looking at a vacant house. I'm retired, so I spend a lot of time on my front porch, knitting, reading, enjoying the weather with Benjamin, you name it. I also listen to true crime podcasts and sometimes play music. The person who moved in was a young guy, maybe mid-20s. He drove an expensive-looking B-Mob and always dressed in flashy clothing, so I figured he was either well off or pretending to be. I hope I'm not giving the wrong impression. He was sweet. He introduced himself after a few days. His name was Quinn, a few years out of college. As I'd guessed, he was bright and got along well with Benjamin. They laughed, talked about sports, and Benjamin even shared college stories I hadn't heard in ages. Quinn said he worked in the entertainment industry, doing freelance work for some internet personality, whatever that means. It went over my head, but it must have been lucrative. He looked wealthy, talked about stocks with Benjamin, and mentioned investments he was making. All in all, he seemed like a nice guy. Things were normal for a few months. I'd see Quinn wave when leaving his house, and I'd wave back. I can't recall exactly when, but I started noticing the same girl going to his house every so often. She drove a white convertible, was young, blonde, the type you'd expect a guy like him to date, to be frank. She dressed a bit scandalously, which I didn't appreciate. I figured she was his girlfriend, maybe checking on the house while he was out. She had her own key, so it made sense. It became regular. Once or twice a week, I'd see her car roll up while Quinn was gone. She'd go inside, stay a while, then leave. I didn't understand what she was doing, but young people date differently, so I kept my thoughts to myself. Then one evening, I saw them together. Quinn pulled into his driveway with her in the passenger seat, confirming she was his girlfriend. But shortly after, things seemed tense. One afternoon, I was tending my garden when I heard shouting from across the street. Quinn and the girl were in the driveway yelling. I couldn't catch what they were arguing about, but she kept throwing her hands in the air, practically spitting words at him. It looked like she might strike him. Eventually, she got in her car, slammed the door, and tore off. Quinn shook his head and went inside. I don't think he noticed me. I figured it was a lover's spat every couple fights, and it wasn't my place to butt in. But then I saw her car at his house again when he wasn't home. Not once, not twice, but multiple times. I told Benjamin, and he said it was rude to pry and that I should leave the boy alone, which I agreed with. Then came the night everything went sideways. Benjamin and I were asleep when sirens woke us. We rushed outside, joining neighbors who'd come to see what was happening. Quinn's house was swarming with police cars, an ambulance, the whole 9 yards. We watched as cops emerged with the girl in handcuffs. She didn't struggle or scream, just stared ahead blankly. We saw Quinn rushed out on a stretcher, a bloody mess. I gasped at the sight. We didn't see Quinn for a week. I was worried sick. When he returned, Benjamin and I checked on him. He let us in and told us everything. The girl, Ellie, had confessed, making things easy for the police. For starters, she wasn't supposed to have his key. She'd stolen his spare and made a copy without him knowing. She started asking for things, fancy dinners, jewelry, expensive trips. When he hesitated, she got possessive and angry, and things went downhill. Every time she showed up unannounced, he hadn't been aware, she had access to his location through his phone, which I didn't know was possible. She'd gone through his stuff, but worst of all, planted hidden cameras in his room every time she returned when he wasn't there. She was replacing camera batteries and checking they worked. The argument I overheard was Quinn trying to break up with her. She refused, and Quinn reluctantly agreed to a break. Ellie saw everything through the cameras. The next night, she went to his house with a knife. I won't explain the rest. You get the idea. Somehow, Quinn got her to the ground, but not before she seriously injured him. The doctor said he was an inch from needing surgery or dying. Benjamin and I tried to console him, but he was shaken. The last thing he said was that he'd learned his lesson about flaunting money, especially around pretty girls. He moved out soon after, saying he didn't feel safe and that his ex had friends like her, and he wasn't comfortable knowing they might know where he lived. We never saw him again. I pray he's okay. No one should go through that, especially not someone so young. When I moved into my new place, I was looking for a fresh start. I won't get into details, but let's say a bad situation with an ex made staying in my old city impossible. I came into some money early in life and made bad decisions about the women I surrounded myself with. Lesson learned. The neighborhood I moved to is nice, low crime, quiet, mostly families. The houses are spaced out, which drew me there, but for some reason, the property next to mine is much closer than most others. By the way, that house next door is huge. When I first saw it, I thought it could fit a family of 10, great-grandparents and all. I couldn't have been more wrong, though I tried to be low-key. I wasn't going to be a rude neighbor. I introduced myself to everyone in the neighborhood. For whatever reason, I saved my next door neighbors for last. I can't tell you why. Everyone else seemed sweet and genuine. 90% were parents of young kids, slightly intimidating based on how successful they seemed. I wasn't sure how a single guy in his late 20s would blend into a community like that, but that was my concern. When I got to my next door neighbor, my social battery was drained from making small talk with strangers. I knew if I went home, I'd never be motivated to meet them, so I sucked it up and walked up their driveway. I was used to being greeted by someone middle-aged, so when a young-looking guy with a mullet opened the door, I was taken aback. He looked younger than me, which was a shock. I recovered and gave my new to the neighborhood spiel. As I went on, he flashed a massive smile and cut me off, saying something like, "Wow, someone born in my decade, what a nice surprise." I laughed and vented about feeling out of place among families with kids. He told me not to worry, that most people here kept to themselves, which was a relief. He introduced himself as Damon and said I should come by for a drink sometime. I shrugged and said, hell, why not right now, expecting him to laugh and invite me in. Instead, he looked over his shoulder, scanning his living room, then said he wished he could but was busy working. I asked what he did, a normal follow-up, and he dropped his smile. After a weird stare, he laughed and said, finance, but didn't elaborate, which I thought was strange. I said, fair enough, and asked if he had roommates. To my surprise, he said he lived alone, which was insane given the house's size. We chatted a few more minutes, he gave me his number and went back inside. I was excited someone my age lived here, especially since he seemed chill, but I couldn't get over how odd it was for someone like him to live alone. I know I was doing the same, but my house wasn't half the size of his. That was about 6 months ago. For a few weeks after, nothing eventful happened. I texted Damon a few days after to set something up, but he always complained about being busy and apologized for not hanging out. Eventually, I gave up, not hostile, just a you do you kind of way. I'm not the type to bend over backward for someone who seems disinterested. I never saw anyone coming or going from Damon's place. No visitors, parties, girls, nothing. He never got takeout delivered, which was strange because his car was always in the driveway. I didn't know what he ate since he never left. The guy lived like a ghost. I work from home, and my office is on the 3rd floor overlooking Damon's property. If you're wondering how I knew so much about his habits, I know it sounds obsessive, but his house was a glance away from my monitor, so I couldn't help looking over sometimes. One Wednesday night, I woke around 2 in the morning to loud music. I sleep with my windows open, so that's probably why I woke so easily at first. I thought I was imagining it, or it was a vivid dream, but I was wrong. I got out of bed, peeked out my window, and saw 7 or so cars lined up in Damon's driveway. He was having a party. I'm not one to complain about noise. I've been to my share of house parties, but it was midweek and the volume was insane. I figured I'd go over, knock, and ask him to turn it down. I threw on a hoodie and walked over. It was a full-blown party from outside. I knocked, but no one answered. I pulled out my phone to text Damon, but decided against it, knowing he'd probably ignore me with some excuse. The next morning, I knocked again, harder. Still nothing. I reached for the handle, half expecting it to be locked, but the door swung open. Inside, I saw a pile of shoes in the foyer, at least 10 pairs, but something was off. There was literally no one there. I moved further, expecting people in the living room or kitchen, but it was empty. No drinks were left out. I could hear people over the music playing in the background, which I didn't understand. Then I listened closely and it hit me. It wasn't music, but a recording of people laughing, yelling, clinking glasses. The whole party was fake. But that didn't make sense. It didn't explain the shoes or cars. There were people in that house, that much was certain. I should have turned around, but I needed to know what was going on. I moved discreetly until I saw a door slightly ajar. I pushed it open and it led to the basement. Something told me what I was looking for was downstairs. It was dark, except for a faint light from somewhere I couldn't see. There was no reason to go down, but I did. At the bottom, I looked around. The light came from another door deeper in the basement. As I crept closer, I picked up another noise over the music, a heavy, rhythmic grinding like heavy machinery or a buzzsaw. I got close enough to see through the crack. Three older guys, significantly older than Damon, stood looking across the room at something out of view. They wore heavy-duty work clothes, protective goggles, thick rubber gloves, and work boots, though I'd seen other shoes upstairs. Under different circumstances, I'd have assumed they were construction workers. I wanted to see what they were looking at, but it was too far. After a few seconds, I picked up an awful bleach smell or some cleaning solution. That's what did it. I felt a pit in my stomach like my life was in danger. I can't explain it. I turned to leave as quiet as possible. As I found my way back to the stairs, the light behind me dimmed like someone shut the door. I didn't hear it over the music, but I felt it. I sprinted up the stairs, ran through the house, and burst out the front door. I didn't run to my house. I jumped my fence, made it to the backyard, and slipped in through my side door, locking it. My chest was pounding, but I couldn't let Damon or those guys know I'd been snooping. I gathered myself and went to my office, ensuring all lights were off. I crouched below the window and peeked at Damon's house. No one was there, but minutes later, the front door flew open and 8 guys poured out, scanning the yard, driveway, and street. Damon wasn't with them. Everyone looked older, like the guys I'd seen. Some argued, but I couldn't hear what about. One shoved another, and I thought they'd fight, but they didn't. They went back inside, and the music stopped soon after. I stood at the window, trying to make sense of it. I thought about calling the cops, but had no real crime to report. The music was off. I couldn't understand why no neighbors complained, especially with kids. I figured if they'd heard and I called the police, Damon would know it was me. The shoes baffled me. Everyone wore boots. So why extra pairs in the foyer? I had too many questions and didn't know what to do, so I went to bed. The next morning, I looked out my window. Every car, including Damon's, was gone. I tried to work but couldn't concentrate, glancing at his house every 5 seconds. After hours of his car not being there, I went for a walk to clear my head and glance through his windows. Nothing. Days passed, and Damon didn't return, or at least his car didn't. I was baffled. I couldn't figure out how my neighbors slept through the noise, so I asked a few if they'd heard the party. No one knew what I was talking about. Even after I specified the house and time, I thought I was going crazy. That was a few months ago. Damon still hasn't returned. His grass is long, and untouched packages pile against his door. I don't know what to make of it. It could be nothing, but no one would fake a party unless it was something illegal. Would they forget to lock the front door? Maybe that's what the guys were arguing about. The fact that no neighbors were bothered makes me think I'm in some conspiracy. I know I'm paranoid, but I have so many unanswered questions. If Damon returns, I'm debating whether to ask him outright.